Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
Late one rainy night in a small town, a rookie cop named Daniel was on his first solo patrol. The streets were empty, except for the occasional flicker of streetlights and the distant hum of thunder. Around midnight, Daniel received a call about a disturbance at an old abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. The radio crackled with static, and the dispatcher's voice sounded strained. The message was vague: possible break-in, multiple reports of screams, officers already on scene, but no response. As Daniel arrived, the rain intensified, drumming hard on his cruiser's roof. The warehouse was a hulking silhouette against the stormy sky, windows shattered and rusted metal doors hanging loosely. The air smelled damp and rotten. He radioed in, "I'm outside." No sign of the other officers. No reply. The silence was thick, almost suffocating. Daniel stepped out and felt the cold bite through his uniform. As he moved closer, he heard faint whispers carried by the wind, but they didn't sound like voices from the living. They were garbled, desperate, like a chorus of souls trapped in agony. A chill ran down his spine. He reached for his flashlight and pushed the creaking door open. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing overturned crates and splatters of something dark on the floor. Suddenly, his radio buzzed erratically, the dispatcher's voice distorting into agonized screams before cutting off. The warehouse lights flickered on, harsh and unnatural, illuminating a gruesome scene. There were 3 of his fellow officers, bloodied, eyes wide with terror, frozen in place as if trapped in a nightmare. Their radios were crushed, their badges twisted. Daniel's heart pounded as he moved forward, the air growing colder with every step. He heard footsteps echo behind him, slow and deliberate, but every time he spun around, no one was there. Then the unmistakable sound of a radio turning on. It crackled to life, but the voice was distorted, chanting something in a low, guttural tone that made Daniel's skin crawl. He ran toward the exit, but the warehouse seemed to stretch impossibly, corridors twisting and rearranging themselves. The screams grew louder, now overlapping with static and bursts of static-filled radio chatter from officers who had never made it out. Daniel's flashlight flickered and died, plunging him into blackness. The last thing Daniel heard before losing consciousness was his own name whispered on the radio, but it wasn't coming from the dispatcher. It was close, too close, coming from the darkness surrounding him, beckoning. Days later, when a search team found the warehouse, it was empty. No sign of Daniel or the other officers. The only thing left behind was a radio, still turned on, endlessly repeating the static-laden voice calling out for help, a voice no one could ever trace or silence. From that night on, every patrol near that warehouse reported strange noises on their radios, faint screams, urgent calls for backup, and Daniel's chilling final words, "I'm not alone."
Story number 2.
On a quiet October night in 2016, a police officer named Darren Holt received a call that would change his life forever. He was a seasoned patrolman in a small rural town in Missouri, the kind of player everyone knew everyone, and crime rarely escalated past the occasional drunk driver or domestic dispute. The call came in just after midnight. A frantic woman claimed she saw someone standing in her backyard, a tall man with no face, just skin where features should have been. Darren had taken plenty of strange calls over the years, but something in her voice, pure, shaking terror, made him take this one seriously. He grabbed his flashlight, radioed it in, and drove out to the edge of town. The house was isolated, surrounded by trees that cast long, claw-like shadows in the moonlight. The woman, elderly and visibly shaken, met Darren on the porch. She insisted she saw the man several nights in a row, always around the same time, always just standing still, watching her. She pointed out back. Darren walked across the yard, crunching dead leaves under his boots, but there was no one there. He searched the perimeter with his flashlight. Nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, no signs of a person. Still, to ease the woman's mind, he promised to patrol the area throughout the night. That should have been the end of it. The next night, another call. Different house, same description. A faceless man standing motionless in a yard, vanishing when anyone approached. This time, Darren called for backup. His partner, Officer Rodriguez, joined him. They canvassed the property, even checked the surrounding woods. No signs, no tracks, But Darren did find something odd near the tree line, an old rusted badge, police issue, outdated, corroded beyond recognition. No number, just the vague shape of a shield. Rodriguez laughed it off. Maybe he's a ghost cop here to enforce the afterlife. But Darren didn't laugh. Something felt off. In the following days, the sightings continued. Always the same description, always after midnight, and always near properties that bordered the woods. Darren dove into old department records and found something chilling. Back in the 1970s, there had been another officer, Glenn Merrick, who went missing while responding to a call deep in those same woods. His body was never found. No evidence, no signs of struggle, just his cruiser parked on the side of a dirt road with the engine still running. The deeper Darren looked, the more he found reports of strange sightings going back decades. Locals referred to it as the Watcher. Some said it was a man driven mad during a manhunt in the 50s. Others claimed it was the ghost of an officer who'd gotten lost and became something else. One night, Darren decided to go into the woods alone. He didn't tell dispatch. He didn't tell Rodriguez. He followed the old case files, retracing Merrick's final call. The deeper he went, the quieter it got. The woods seemed to swallow sound. Even the crickets went silent. About a mile in, he found an abandoned shack, something that wasn't on any property map. Inside were rotting wooden chairs, rusted tools, and disturbing drawings etched into the walls. Crude, childlike depictions of a man with no face, wearing a police uniform, looming over houses. One of the drawings had Darren scratched beneath it. He turned around and saw a figure standing just outside the shack. It was tall, uniformed, and its face was just skin. Darren raised his gun and shouted commands, but the figure didn't move, didn't breathe. And then, like smoke, it vanished. The woods around him seemed to pulse with something ancient, something angry. He ran back to his cruiser, the radio crackling with static. Only one word broke through, his name. The next morning, Darren submitted his resignation. He moved states, changed his name, and never spoke of that night again. But reports of the Watcher never stopped. Local kids dare each other to go into those woods. Sometimes they come back different. Sometimes they don't come back at all. And every few years, a rookie officer gets a late-night call from a terrified resident about a man with no face.
Story number 3.
One cold, rainy night in a small town nestled between dense woods, Officer Mark had just started his late shift. The kind of night where the fog clings low to the ground and every shadow seems to move just a little too fast. Mark had been on the force for 5 years, and while he'd seen his share of strange calls, nothing quite prepared him for what happened that night. Around midnight, dispatch crackled with a panicked voice reporting a man wandering the highways, hitchhiking. He was described as disheveled, talking to himself, and acting aggressively. Mark drove toward the reported location, a stretch of road winding through the darkest part of the forest. The headlights barely pierced the fog as Mark's cruiser rolled slowly down the narrow lane. He spotted the figure a few hundred yards ahead, an older man, clothes soaked from the rain, eyes darting wildly as if chased by invisible demons. Mark pulled over and called out, "Sir, are you all right? Do you need help?" The man didn't respond, only muttered something unintelligible. Mark opened the door and stepped out, the wet ground squelching beneath his boots. As he approached, the man suddenly lunged at him, screaming in a voice that shattered the silence. "You don't belong here! They're watching!" Startled, Mark took a step back. The man's eyes weren't just wild, they seemed almost empty, black pits swallowing all light. Dispatch buzzed again with a report of a second sighting, but this time from a few miles away on the opposite side of town. Mark radioed for backup and decided to bring the man in for questioning. But as he reached to grab the man's arm, the figure vanished into the mist, leaving behind nothing but a faint chill that crawled up Mark's spine. Suddenly, his radio sputtered with static, then a garbled whisper, "You're next." Heart pounding, Mark ran back to his cruiser. As he fumbled with the door, he caught a glimpse in the rearview mirror, an outline standing on the edge of the woods. It was the same man, except now his eyes glowed an unnatural red, and his mouth twisted into a sinister grin. Mark slammed the door and locked it tight. Backup arrived minutes later, but when they searched the area, there was no sign of the man or anything unusual. only the tire tracks leading into the woods and disappearing into thick undergrowth as if swallowed whole. Mark was shaken, but tried to shake it off until the next week when reports flooded in from officers across neighboring towns. Similar sightings of the strange man, always disappearing before anyone could get close, always accompanied by whispers over radios, unexplained chills, and a growing feeling that something ancient and malevolent was stalking the night. One night, Mark was driving a patrol alone when his radio went silent for nearly 10 minutes. Then, with a crackle, the voice came back. This time clear but cold and threatening. "You're in our territory now." Terrified, Mark sped toward the station, but the road seemed different, twisting, stretching farther than they should, as if the forest itself was warping reality. His headlights caught movement, a figure standing in the middle of the road, blocking his path. It was the man again, eyes glowing, and behind him, shadowy figures emerged, their forms barely human, flickering at the edge of vision. Mark slammed on the brakes, heart racing. The radio hissed once more, "Run." The next morning, the station found his cruiser abandoned on that twisted road, engine running, keys in the ignition, but Mark was gone without a trace. The only clue was the dashcam footage, static at first, then a distorted, grainy image of the man's face, inches from the camera, whispering, "You'll never leave." Officers who reviewed the footage reported feeling watched, their radios crackling with strange noises, and many refused to patrol that road again. To this day, locals avoid driving it at night, whispering about the shadow man who haunts the police in the woods, waiting silently for the next soul to vanish into the fog. One quiet town, known for its calm streets and friendly neighbors, suddenly became the stage for a nightmare that police officers still whisper about. It started on a cold, foggy night when Officer Mark Daniels received a call about a missing person, an elderly woman named Mrs. Grayson, who hadn't been seen since sundown. Mark was a seasoned cop, had seen his share of strange cases, but something about this call felt off. He drove to Mrs. Grayson's small, isolated house at the edge of town. The fog hung thick, swallowing the light from his cruiser. When he arrived, the front door was slightly ajar. Inside, everything looked normal at first glance. The furniture was dusted, the TV was still humming, but there was no sign of Mrs. Grayson. As Mark moved deeper into the house, the silence pressed against him like a physical weight. In the kitchen, he noticed a strange, acrid smell, like burnt plastic mixed with something metallic. His radio crackled suddenly, static at first, then a faint voice, barely a whisper. "Help me." Mark's heart pounded. He spun around, radio in hand, but there was no one there. He called for backup, but before he could finish, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the house into darkness. Mark pulled out his flashlight, the beam trembling as he swept it through the blackness. The whisper came again, clearer this time, in the basement. His breath caught as he moved toward the narrow staircase. The air grew colder, the smell worse. The basement door creaked open, as if inviting him in. Stepping down, his light landed on scratches etched deep into the concrete walls, names, dates, and chilling messages like "They watch" and "Don't trust the eyes." Then he saw it, a small battered box, humming faintly. Inside were dozens of old faded photographs, images of missing persons, all from the town, all staring directly at the camera with wide, terrified eyes. Suddenly, the basement door slammed shut. Mark tried the handle. It was locked tight. Panic set in as the whisper turned to a scream that echoed around him. "Find the eyes, find the truth." His radio buzzed, but the voice on the other end was distorted, almost inhuman, telling him to look behind. Mark spun, his light catching a mirror cracked and smeared with something dark. As he stared into it, the reflection warped, showing faces of the missing, their mouths moving in silent screams. Then he saw it, two glowing eyes staring back from the darkest corner of the basement. Frozen, Mark felt a cold hand grip his shoulder. He dropped his flashlight. Darkness swallowed him whole. The next morning, his cruiser was found abandoned outside Mrs. Grayson's house. Mark was never seen again. Days later, the new officer assigned to the case discovered the same photographs hidden in a dusty drawer at the police station. Faces with eyes scratched out. From that day forward, every officer who looked too deeply into the town's disappearances reported hearing whispers, seeing eyes watching them in every shadow, and feeling the cold grip of something waiting just out of sight. No one knows what took Mark Daniels that night, but one thing is certain. In that town, the eyes never stop watching, and the shadows never forget.